Canadians are starting to wake up to the reality of what is happening. The fear of Donald Trump is dissipating, and the reality of what they're surrounded by is now facing them straight head on. Now, we are about 11 days from House of Commons being fully resumed here in this country after a big ol' summer break. And so the Conservatives have been having their meetings and now making their intentions very clear. The Liberals are now having their cabinet meetings today and tomorrow and trying to figure out what their game plan is going to be. Right now, what we're seeing is a lot of pressure is being applied to the Liberal Party of Canada. And they don't know how to fully communicate, and they seem to be a little bit disjointed when you have the likes of Chrystia Freeland talking about the BC ferries, and we need to buy Canadian steel, even though she totally greenlighted building ferries across to China. Now she's like, no, we got to make sure it's built Canadian. She didn't really know what she's talking about. Then you had yesterday, we had Prime Minister Carney saying, we need to have austerity. We need to cut things back. We need to trim things up. But we also need to invest. We also need to spend. And he just said a lot of everything and said a whole lot of nothing all at the same time. And again, it comes back to this whole disjointed perspective that's happening. And then we talked about it this morning as well, how on top of all this, with them not knowing how to deal with Donald Trump and the negotiations that are taking place, they invited someone from the head of Project 2025 to come talk to them so they can get in the head of Donald Trump. Well, more has transpired, more has taken place, and the walls are beginning to close in on this Liberal Party, and it's getting very interesting. The fall is going to be very fascinating, and there's some key stories that happened today that we're going to touch on, including the likes of Senator Wen Pao Wu, trying to make sure people stop looking into him having connections to the CCP and all that. Very fascinating. But welcome to the Elevate Podcast. I'm your host, Josh. I'm gratefully back on with you yet again. If you get any value from today's episode, take the time to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us to grow, helps us to get to new audiences, and helps people see that there's something better than what the mainstream media currently offers. Now, let's get into our first story, shall we? As I said, we talked about it this morning. We're having a little bit of inception here, but it says, Project 2025 Mastermind invited to speak at Carney's cabinet meeting at about an hour ago. I guess by the time you're seeing this, about an hour and a half ago. CBC has recently updated this headline, and Liberals realized that people weren't too fond of it. Their party wasn't too fond of it. So what I said this morning was like, oh, how is this cabinet going to relate to someone who they are so ideologically opposing? Can they even simply listen to him? Can they even do it? Well, we got our answer. No, they can't. Project 2025 Mastermind invited to Carney's cabinet meeting, no longer speaking. Wish we could have saw that coming. Really. Holy smokes. And this was the news that broke last night. And all the heat that came on with it early this afternoon is when it was announced that they would no longer be having him speak at his cabinet meeting. It's very fascinating. But we move along because Mr. Mulclair, former NDP leader, was talking about how, yes, cuts are needed. The austerity conversation coming from Mark Carney is, well, interesting, and it's needed. But does he mean it? Does he really want to do it? We know that Pierre Poilievre has been very consistent on this, and he was correct in wanting to make cuts. Is that something Mark Carney can even so much as pull off? And he gets into it here on CTV.
And some of the priorities of keeping in mind any cuts in particular. We talked about the federal public service and how big and you know, to some, including the Conservatives, are saying how out of control that is, the size of government and whatnot. Yeah. But do you see outside of that, or is that particularly maybe one of the things that this government's going to focus on when the cuts come in the fall?
There are entire programs that can be gotten rid of without really affecting the service to the public. But it's, as you say, I mean, the Conservatives are spot on when they say that. The number one failing of Trudeau as an administrator, as a manager, was the size of the civil service. Look, he was there for 9 years, and in 9 years, he increased the size of the federal bureaucracy by 40%. And it was less efficient, not more. It was so inefficient after all those additions of new people that they had to give $20 billion a year in contracts to outside firms to do the work that the civil servants weren't doing. And by the way, I'm not slagging the civil servants individually. They're very good people who've got wonderful experience and background and training. But they're put into a situation where everything is backwards. It's almost as if the computer had never been invented. You just keep adding more and more people on, and then you give these outside contracts to do the work of this inefficient government. So that's the number one thing that Carney can and must change. And he'll have the public on side for that. Because Trudeau said at the beginning, he says, I'm always going to run deficits because it's good for the public. Long before the pandemic, he had already run up $100 billion in new debt for future generations to pay. Well, you can't keep going like that. Then the pandemic hit, and we had hundreds of billions of dollars in new debt added on top of everything else. That's what arrives on Carney's doorstep. He gets to look at the numbers now and say, okay, this is an absolute mess, and I have these very strong people, these good ministers, and they've got to deliver now. And that's what this meeting is about, and that's what Canadians are expecting.
There you have it. Mulclair speaking common sense, speaking the things that we're all seeing. However, whenever you're wearing the blue stripes, it's racist. When you're wearing the blue stripes, you hate people. You don't really care about people. You're just looking out for yourself. But yeah, former NDP leader says it. Oh, you're right. We're seeing it too. You know, whatever. I digress. It's important that he's seeing it, and it's important that people are hearing that, because we're all feeling it. We do know that cuts need to be made. Things have gotten so bloated over the past 10 years. Yes, it's time to go on a weight loss program over here as a Canadian government. And the fact that the Conservatives ever so much as suggested it, they were trounced by the media, obviously trounced by the Liberals, and they were shut down and shuttered down so very quickly. And anyone outside of that who even so much as brought it up, like shows like ours, again, was tagged with the same labels. But he's right. What has happened under Trudeau and the constant bloating of bureaucracy, and this exact issue he brought up here, was the fact they kept bloating and bloating bureaucracy, and the things that those bureaucracies were supposed to be doing weren't doing their jobs, so then they hired out outside consultants to then do those jobs. That's bad. That's terrible. And yes, those programs need to be cut. But guess what? Mark Carney's doing his own version of that these days, isn't he? You know, we're going to do these major projects. We're going to get things done. We're going to do nation-building projects. We got to make sure we reorient our economy. We'll make sure that we're one big economy, not 13 different ones. La, la, la. And his big announcement over the summer, instead of actually getting projects going, was we're going to set up an office to look over our nation-building projects. Sounds like Trudeau through and through, doesn't it? It's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. But here's the good news. That's that. I have some good news for you. You might be frustrated by it. You might be encouraged by it. Who knows? However, based on a latest Abacus data poll, Canadians are starting to wake up to the reality of what is happening. The fear of Donald Trump is dissipating, and the reality of what they're surrounded by is now facing them straight head on. David Coletto of Abacus Data says, our latest poll highlights a tension at the heart of Canadian politics. People know Trump matters, but most feel Ottawa is distracted from urgent challenges closer to home: housing, healthcare, and rising costs. The lesson for leaders: show how global negotiations connect to everyday life, or risk deepening the perception gap that fuels frustration and mistrust. And here was the report. A majority of Canadians, 60%, say the real threat in the next 2 years comes from problems at home: housing, healthcare, and rising costs, while 40% are more worried about Donald Trump's policies and unpredictability. Again, the reality of what people are faced with is now becoming more and more clear. If you remember during the election, this was flipped. It was the opposite. But now, they're realizing Mark Carney's been in for some time, and things aren't really changing. And the regular person doesn't know that we're on vacation. People don't really pay attention to politics, don't know these things. They just know what they're seeing around them. And they're still not seeing anything changing, and they haven't heard really anything announced. And they're wondering, what are we doing here? What's happening? What was the most interesting was families are feeling the strain. The sentiment becomes even sharper at the personal level. Nearly 8 in 10 Canadians, 79%, say rising costs, housing, and healthcare will have a greater impact on their families over the next 2 years than U.S. tariffs or trade policies. Again, this suggests that people may not understand the relationship between Trump's trade policies and domestic, microeconomic, and social issues. The federal government may need to spend more time connecting the dots for Canadians, explaining why getting a deal and why it's focusing so much on getting that deal is important to everyone else. And I think that's something to keep in mind, is they're going to have to try and connect those dots. The reason why they're being a little more vague about these deals is because they don't want people to know that Mark Carney's not doing anything and they can't get anything done on it. But if they have to go into that and have to really Liberals are on a rock and a hard place right now, is what's happening. They can try to kind of gloss over the negotiations with Trump, but still talk about Trump, and try to drive fear. People are going to get more and more frustrated because then you're going to start seeing more stuff like this. Like, things aren't improving here. I don't care about Trump. I care about what's happening in terms of affording a home, affording my life, affording food, affording shelter, these things. But if Mark Carney and liberals decide to start delving into what's been happening to Donald Trump, delving into why there's been no deals and why the deals are really important, why waiting for these deals is important, people are also going to grow impatient. They're going to grow frustrated that you're taking so long to get something done. Rock in a hard place for the Liberal government. But this one I thought was very interesting. So 61% of Canadians say the federal government is too focused on Donald Trump instead of tackling urgent challenges at home. Was saying 26% saying it's far too much, 35% saying it's somewhat too much, and 33% are saying about the right amount, and 6% saying it's too little. Again, so that kind of really shows you where people are currently at when it comes to these issues. And one last thing on that point, I will say, where it says younger Canadians are especially critical, with 70% of those aged 18 to 44 saying the government is too focused on Donald Trump. Even among Liberal voters, more than half, 51%, believe their government is distracted by Trump when pressing domestic problems remain unresolved, compared to 45% who believe it was the right amount of attention. What we're seeing by this, and Abacus data, they do good work. They know what they're doing. They've been, even when you didn't like it, they've been accurate. This is showing the mood is slowly shifting here in Canada. As I said when Mark Carney first got elected, if he continues the way he was going, he's going to lose support just as quickly as he got it. And it's going to get ugly fairly quickly. And word on the street is he's looking to try and get an election going. Word on the street is he's looking maybe just after Christmas, New Year, that they would like to start probably getting another campaign going to secure a majority government. But right now, if this resentment continues to grow, calling that election early may not be helpful for Carney. And the Conservatives are mounting serious momentum and getting the public on their side of what is currently happening. Because the public is also getting frustrated when things like this are hopping up on TikTok and YouTube and all these. This is the York region where another crime took place, violent break and enter was taking place. And I will say the response from the police on this has gone viral. This is the fuller context of what led to those comments.
It was 2:20 in the morning, Sunday, August 31st. Three masked men walk up to this Kleinberg home, smashing the front door with the handle of a gun. The video released by York Regional Police this morning.
At the time of the incident, 2 adults and 2 children, aged 6 and 9, were within the residence. At least one of those suspects was armed with a firearm.
Yelling can be heard from inside, along with what appears to be a security alarm. The three masked men leave, this all happening just 90 minutes after another home invasion killed 46-year-old Aleem Farouki. The two homes are located just 1 kilometer apart.
While the two incidents have not been formally linked, investigators are reviewing the evidence for possible connections.
Farouki was shot and killed inside his Kleinberg home with his 4 children present just before 1 a.m. Vaughan Mayor Stephen Del Duca said keeping communities safe means keeping repeat offenders in jail instead of getting bail.
These 3 specific animals, let's be clear about this, scumbags who have killed this incredibly important person and shattered this family. We don't know who these 3 are, but based on everything I've seen, there is a decent chance, perhaps more than a decent chance, that these are people who have a track record in criminal activity.
Something that York Regional Police Chief Jim McSween said as well.
I'm disappointed to report that many of the violent incidents in our region, we are arresting repeat offenders over and over again.
The police chief saying that while overall crime is down, brazen acts like this one are on the rise.
So that captured what's been going on in York. In York region at this point. And you saw the police chief saying, we keep arresting these guys and they keep being released. Again, that's the federal political aspect of it, is it's federal law that's allowing that to happen. And these police are getting frustrated and getting more frustrated and more frustrated. And they're getting so frustrated that the chief of police said this after all that.
In the unlikely event that you find yourself the victim of a home invasion, we are urging citizens not to take matters into their own hands. While we don't want homeowners to feel powerless, we urge you to call 911 and do everything you can to keep yourself and loved ones safe until police arrive, and be the best witness possible. This could mean locking yourself in a room away from the perpetrators, hiding, fleeing the home, but don't engage unless absolutely necessary. But as it stands, we know the best defense for most people is to comply. As you've just heard, a number of safety recommendations.
This man says, we're getting frustrated that we keep arresting these people and they keep being released. And the best that they can say at this point is, someone breaks in your home, comply. Let them do whatever they want. Comply. That's the best way to stay safe. And I know this chief of police has been getting flamed all over social media for saying this, but when put in the broader context, you can hear how frustrated he is that his people are doing the job, but it's the justice system that keeps letting these people out. That he's left having to say something like this because there's no other hope. And stuff like this that people are getting frustrated with. And why Donald Trump may not be a strong enough fear tactic much longer. And as I said, the walls are closing on this Liberal Party. I mean it. Senator Wen Pao Wu is teaming up with former Senator Victor O to launch Canadians United Against Modern Exclusion, an organization dedicated to challenging what they call false or exaggerated claims of foreign interference, national security overreach, and fear of the other. So if you want to get an idea of who these two are, well, Senator Wen Pao Wu is this guy over here, a Canadian senator who's promised to support members in the CCP's United Front. You know, the organization that is an extension of the Communist Party of China that's been messing around with our laws, messing around in our country, and huge facilitator of the fentanyl trafficking in our country. So he's got some deep connections to CCP. Hasn't been fully found guilty of any type of foreign interference, but people are like, yeah, you've been doing some sketchy stuff. The likes of the Bureau has been doing some great work highlighting and exposing him. And then you have the likes of Victor O, who was called out along with Senator Wen Pao Wu, being linked to actions, like taking actions against Canada's interest, as you can see here. The submission to Ottawa's FIC from Chinese Canadian Concern Group points at Senator Wen Pao Wu, also an intervener with the commission, and Senator Victor O. Isn't it hilarious? These two guys who have some deep connections to the CCP, who one used to be a senator, one is currently a senator, is getting flamed and still getting pressure applied to them, as rightfully so, are now launching an organization to challenge false or exaggerated claims of foreign interference. This is a joke. This is seriously a joke. And these people need to be challenged and need to be called out for such ludicrous behavior and stupidity. This is them trying to cover their tracks for everything they've done and committed it against our country while serving as senators in our country. I'll end off with Mayor Brad West's words, Mayor of Port Coquitlam. And he had this to say: "You're not on Team Canada, and your elbows aren't up if you spent the last decade or longer selling out the national interest to the Chinese Communist Party." And to that, I say, hear, hear. Couldn't agree more. And that goes to the whole entirety of the Liberal Party, who's been very connected, deep in the pockets of the likes of the United Front and the CCP. And Brad West calling it what it is. And I couldn't agree more. But that's where I want to leave it. As Canadians are waking up to the reality that's in front of them, Donald Trump is becoming less and less of an issue for them, and they're more now looking and feasting their eyes on those who are in leadership of this country and wondering, what the heck are you going to do? It'll be interesting to watch this fall. But anyways, enjoy your Thursday. NFL football starts tonight. Have yourselves a good one. I'm out.